Yangyang is one of the first resonators we will obtain for free in this game, and that already very early into the game. She is also a surprisingly strong supportive unit if built correctly with a few hidden techniques. Yangyang is an Aero Sword-wielding supportive utility DPS who excels in short rotations with high concerto generation, providing grouping and buffs to your team if done correctly. So in this guide we will cover her skills, her best weapons, echoes and her best echo sets, her best teams, her sequence nodes and how to play her correctly. Let's go! Her basic attacks are mostly, well, just basic attacks. Technically, she has this cool looking Zephyr song, but we will not really use it within her standard rotation. However, if you do press the basic attack after a dodge counter, you will perform said Zephyr song. Her skill, Zephyr Domain, creates a vortex which deals solid damage and gathers surrounding enemies. Her Resonance Liberation costs 100 energy, generates the usual 20 concerto and has a 16 seconds cooldown. Wind Spirals is basically an enhanced version of her skill.
That's the simplest way to put it, honestly.
Her fourth circuit mechanics is called Echoing Feathers and allows her to gather so-called melodies, up to 3. She gains 1 melody each time her basic 4, Zephyr Song and skill hit an enemy or when her intro skill is cast. When Yangyang has 3 feathers, she can cast her mid-air skill Feather Release, which will generate an enormous 30 concerto energy and will be an integral part of her rotation due to that. Her intro skill itself simply deals some damage and is hence also nothing special aside from the concerto it generates. Her outro is where most of her utility lies, well, aside from her gathering capabilities. When cast, the next resonator coming in will generate 20 resonance liberation energy over 5 seconds. This effect will also continue to linger in the background, which for example means you can go from Yangyang into Jian, into Mortifi, and after going back to Jian, Jian will have these 20 energy generated while Mortifi was on the field. For her inherent skills, she gains 8% aero damage bonus when casting her intro skill, and can recover 30 stamina after Feather Release. None of these are particularly helpful, but hey, they may help in a very few situations. Knowing her kit, we can now also talk about her skill priority. As always, none of the buffs or utility provided does actually scale, so we can purely base the priority on the damage dealt. And hence, looking at her damage distribution, most damage comes from her ultimate, followed by her basics, then the echo, skill, and lastly intro. Her skill priority would hence be ultimate into fort, into basic attacks, into skill, into intro. Her sequence nodes will provide her with around 30% more damage and more utility, going from S0 to S6. Most notable here is her S5 for the highest damage increase. Before we continue, we will cover her in 2 possible playstyles: supportive utility DPS and as a solid secondary utility DPS. And technically there's also the hyper carry version, so I guess we will cover her in 3 possible playstyles. We will start with the secondary utility DPS. This basically means we want to play her full damage, and the most damage you gain from the 5-star standard weapon Emerald of Genesis. Her next best weapon is R5 Commando of Conviction, which you can obtain from the 4-star selector, which we get for free from the milestone, and even up to that is the Lunar Cutter, but both are still about 20% weaker than the 5-star counterpart. The best set for DPS Yangyang is the 5-piece Yada Gale with the Phalian Beringal as your echo ability, that's this monkey. Other options would include mix matching 2-piece Sierra and 2-piece Lingering Tunes or 5-piece Lingering Tunes, but both options will provide you with significantly less damage than a 5-piece Sierra Gale. For her main stats, crit values, arrow damage percent and attack percent are the go-to. For her subs, her priority will be mostly damage focused as well, crit values into attack percent. If you want to run Yangyang as a hyper carry support while still dealing a fine amount of damage, 5-piece Moonlit Clouds is another good option. It will deal around 28% less damage than a 5-piece Yada Gale, but allows you to grant an attack percent buff to your entire team as well as the 20 energy from her outro to your main DPS. For the main and substat priority, it is honestly the same as for DPS Yangyang, which means crit values, arrow damage percent and attack percent for the main stats, and for the substats your priorities should simply be crit values and attack percent. If you want to get really juicy though, the hyper carry hyper support tech, as I want to call it, I honestly don't have a better name, for Yangyang might be an interesting, even if very niche option as well. For her weapon, you only have exactly one choice. Originite type 2. That is because this weapon heals Yangyang every time her ultimate is cast, and because the game recognizes this healing to originate from the resonator itself, it will trigger the 15% attack percent buff for the entire team from the set Rejuvenating Glow. Hence, that's also the set you want to run with. On top of that, you now can also take the Bellbone Echo as your Echo ability, which will provide a 10% damage boost and 50% damage reduction to your entire team for 15 seconds, or until you have been hit 3 times, so...
Hence, avoid being hit. Dodge and parry, use the game mechanics.
However, this version of Yangyang also requires some energy regeneration, around 50%, to be able to cast her ultimate once every 20 seconds. Yes, the buff from Rejuvenating Glow itself does last for 30 seconds, but Bellborn is ready again after 20 seconds, and her ultimate is 16 seconds. This means we want to switch in once about every 20 seconds. To explain how this team would work, I will take a Jian, Mortifi and Yangyang example. Yangyang takes the place of your support, and because you don't have any sustain in this team, dodging and parrying, well, is very important. In this team, you would start the team rotation with Yangyang. You take her outro into Jian to give him the 20 energy, directly switch to Mortifi and do Mortifi's rotation, and then you switch back to Jian to start his usual ultimate and combo stuff. Jian will gain the 20 energy from Yangyang while he is off field, basically while Mortifi does his things. This is very effective, but also a very specific build. Overall, you will provide a 15% attack buff, a 10% damage boost, 50% damage reduction, a gather and energy for your team. However, use with caution. It is a little cool tech to play if you are comfortable and allows some characters like Jian or Encore even to build less energy regen. However, it's also risky and it might not necessarily be the best for all teams. For the sub and main stat priorities, you certainly want, as I said, ER percent until around 50 to 60%. Otherwise, you want to indeed still prioritize any damage, mostly crit values, arrow damage percent and attack percent. Since her attack is quite low in this build, flat attack is actually better and gives slightly more damage than other stats like skill or liberation damage percent. To be honest, skill and liberation damage percent and basic attack percent and heavy attack percent are actually not that good in this game. And in some scenarios like here, flat attack will actually give you more damage. However, now that we know all of this, we can start to get into her rotation. Starting off with the intro, into her ultimate, into skill, into 4 times basics, into her 4th feather release, into echo, and then you swap cancel out. Very important is this rotation heavily relies on the intro still to generate the last missing melody for her 4th. Which means you only want to switch her in if you can guarantee that her intro skill will be cast. And that leaves us with the teams. As I already mentioned before, hyper carry, hyper support is great in a Jian, Mortifi, Yangyang team. If you like Encore, she also works well with hair, pairing Yangyang with Encore and for example Sanhua. Since most of Encore's damage comes from basic attacks and Encore can actually not really parry with her normal basic attacks, outside her ultimate at least, having Sanhua as a secondary sub-DPS who can also grant a 38% basic attack damage boost to Encore, well, they just do work together really well. Sanhua could also run the Moonlit Cloud set for exactly this purpose, to buff up Encore even more. The same could be applied to Concerto, as Yangyang would solve his small energy problems. As you can see, again, the hyper carry, hyper support build thingy here is quite risky, but also allows for a few possible new team comps. If you have Verena, pairing Yangyang with Verena and Encore works well as well, although Yangyang would take the Moonlit Cloud set here as a supportive sub-DPS. If you really love Yangyang and want to play her as a hyper carry main DPS, pairing her with Alto as her direct supportive DPS, and Verena, Baiji or Taoki for sustain to proc the Rejuvenating Glow set would be another option. although your damage output will be behind other characters who are actually a good main DPS. And this wraps up the Yangyang guide. Thank you so much for watching, have a great day and enjoy the showcase. Peace!